All right, Venture, it is great to see you here in this space today, even though I know some of you are operating on one less hour of sleep. I'm so grateful that you're here today. And hey, that cutie that just left the stage happens to be my wife. And what'd she say? Ladies, go talk somebody into going to If. I want to do the same. You don't want to miss out on that. If you're a gal here in our church, well, get your free t-shirt today by signing up, but more importantly, join those gals that are going to be spending time together with God and with each other at If. Good stuff happens there. This is week 4 of our Lead Like David series. It's 4 of 4. We're wrapping it up today. Great leaders, well, they build success, right? Sure. Let me add to that. Wise leaders build successors. They want to see their life's work carry on. Most people think that leadership is about how you begin, and sure, it is. But your talent, your courage, that big defining moment we hang so much on, they're important, but the Bible suggests that there's something else. The true measure of leadership is not how loudly you start, but how wisely you finish. That's exactly where we find David today. Not a shepherd boy with a sling. Not a warrior running toward Goliath, not a king sitting on a throne, but David, I like this word, a sage, an older leader looking back over his life and preparing the next generation. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to travel to Israel, to one of the most fascinating places, well, for my money, I've ever enjoyed. It's an archaeological site, Sha'arayim. When I was there, it was still an active archaeological dig site. I've got a picture of a group of us walking in. These stones you're looking at right there, until just, like you could measure the time in months before that photograph was taken. For almost 3,000 years, those stones had been covered up by time and dirt. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 52, the Bible mentions a place. We weren't sure if it was a place. We weren't sure if it was a geographical reference called Sha'arayim. This word in the Hebrew, it literally means 2 gates. What makes this archaeological site fascinating is geographically where it sits. It's on a ridge overlooking the valley of Elah. If you are a Bible student, perhaps you hear that and dashboard lights blink for you. If that valley sounds familiar, the valley of Elah, it sounds familiar because this is where a young shepherd named David once walked down into that valley system to face Goliath. It's an epic story. But something unusual was discovered when the archaeologists discovered that city. Get this, they found 2 gates in the city wall. 2 gates. That might not sound remarkable, but ancient cities from that era almost always had, not 2, but 1 gate. 1 gate is easier to defend. If you've got a walled city, why would you give 2 entrance points to be attacked by? Suddenly, scholars noticed something interesting as they were pulling the dirt and time off of these archaeological ruins. 2 gates captured their attention. I've got a picture I want to show you. This is an aerial shot. I didn't take this. This was taken by a drone in 2017, not that awful long ago. After the completion of the archaeological excavations, they popped the drone up in the air and took a picture down. By the way, I love stuff like this. I know I'm only talking to like 3 to 5% of our church right now, but if you're a nerd like me and archaeology is interesting to you, have I got a resource for you. You might notice there's a watermark on this picture. It's from BibleWalks.com. Let me stretch it beyond the nerds. If you feel like your faith could be grown, there would be opportunity for it to be grown by discovering over and over and over again that the authenticity of God's Word, our Bible, it bears up to scrutiny. I mean, every time they uncover another one of these places, we discover the Bible is referenced in a place 3,000 years ago. We didn't know it existed. Boom, there it exists. Let me show you more. Remember, Sha'arayim means 2 gates. This is a close-up of one of those 2 gates. If you go back a slide real quick, this is that same location. Let's hit the next picture. You're looking through that gate structure into what? Oh, the Valley of Elah. David, Goliath. For centuries, people wondered if that place even existed. And then archaeologists uncovered this city, 2 gates, boom, exactly where Scripture said it would be. I'm going to show you how here in just a minute. We got to go to the story, that epic climax moment where David, little shepherd boy David, he walks up to a babbling brook, the Elah stream. Some people refer to it as the brook Elah. By the way, this is interesting. I think I had this conversation actually walking around Sha'arayim. A friend of mine is an archaeologist, and he said, it's so funny, people come and visit the Holy Land, and they want to leave with a souvenir. So people walk down to that little stream, and guess what they pick up? 5 little stones, a little something to remember the trip by. And he was telling me this dirty little secret that the Bureau of Tourism, they show up sometimes in the middle of the night with dump trucks full of rocks and replenish the rocks in that stream. I think that's hilarious. David goes to the stream. If you grew up in church like I did, maybe you know the song, he takes 5 little stones, and one of those stones he puts into a sling, and the sling went around and around. Some of you know the song, and around and around and around and around and around. And one little stone hit the giant in the head, and the giant came tumbling down. Right after that moment, here's the text. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 51. David ran and stood over Goliath. This is where the text goes from PG to PG-13. He took hold of the Philistine's sword, and he drew it from the scabbard. After he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw that their hero was dead, they turned and they ran. Then the men of Israel and Judah, this is before King David, unifies the tribes, surged forward with a shout and pursued the Philistines to the entrance of Gath, Philistine city, and to the gates of Ekron, Philistine city. Their dead were strewn along the Sha'arayim road. Pay attention to that. To Gath and Ekron. When the Israelites returned from pursuing the Philistines, they plundered their camp. David took the Philistines' head and brought it to Jerusalem. Pay attention to that. And he put the Philistines' weapons in his own tent. This reads a little bit like a Ken Burns documentary. These are like summary statements of what was a much longer story. I want to point out a couple of interesting things. We just read about Jerusalem. Jerusalem, at the time this story happened, well, it didn't exist yet, at least by that name. We talked about this story last week. King David sent his mighty men. He had spied out the city of Jebus, the capital city of the Jebusites, and he wanted it as the political seat, the space eventually where worship would land for the whole nation. Jerusalem, he wanted it as his capital city. So he sent his mighty men up a water shaft to capture that city. But that was much later, after he was king. At this point in time, when the story happens, It's not a city yet, not with the name Jerusalem. So this is written after the fact, and it's kind of recapping this is what happened in that story to the original audience that we all know so well. It's an origin story for King David. Which, if that's true, Jerusalem didn't exist yet in the way we know it. Well, neither did the Sha'araim Road. That was in the text as well. In my opinion, it was not a city yet. Biblical scholars and archaeologists, many of them, theorize that Sha'araim would have been built by David after he became king, almost as a political statement. He puts it right at the edge of the new territory that has been absorbed into the kingdom of Israel. And he also sticks it right at the edge of that territory, overlooking into Philistine territory, almost as an outpost. And that he did this, likely, after he became king. So when they say the Sha'araim Road, well, that's what it was known as then, when it was written after the story actually happened. Listen, the Valley of Elah is to David what Valley Forge is to George Washington. You could argue that if there was no Valley Forge, I might be talking with a British accent right now. The Valley of Elah is a big deal. Now, I'm not saying that God is sovereign. He can do whatever he wants to do. But the story goes, he used that moment as a rally cry and as an opportunity to shape young David's character. And the word got out. This is a part of David's origin story. The people who lived in Israel, they knew about it. Can I orient you on the map? Can I show you a map of where Sha'araim fits into that larger story? Here's the map. I don't know if you can see that from where you're at or not, but I joke about having a hand map. I giggled, I don't know, this past week when I was looking back through these pictures. That's not my hand in the photograph. Actually, that is my sister-in-law, and she had written her own map on her hand and stuck it in the picture. It says Philistines this direction, and it says Israel that direction, Valley of Elah. That's not a good enough map. Let me show you on Google Earth. So here is the valley system. You can tell it's modern day agricultural space. The Valley of Elah. Sha'araim, the archaeological ruin site that we just looked at. This is the direction you would come from Jerusalem, from the interior of the country. This area over here, Azekah, is mentioned in the text we just read. Gath, Ekron, those Philistine cities, they're just off the map over here. Strategic location right at the edge of the nation of Israel. And when I think about this city that, in my opinion, David commissioned, had built, it doesn't take much of a step for me to picture him as an older, wiser king, way more gray in his hair, standing on the edge of that city, looking over the Valley of Elah. I had somebody take a picture of me when I was there years ago, looking out over that space, wondering, oh wow, David, an aging king, standing on that ridge, looking out across the valley where his story began. Penny for your thoughts, King David with gray hair. Listen, leadership has seasons. David began his life running toward giants, but by the end of his life, he'd learned something, even more important. What? How to prepare the next generation. Can I remind you of the narrative arc of David's life story? We've got it in picture form. Week 1, we talked about the shepherd and the value that love comes before leadership. Week 2, we talked about the warrior poet in En-Gedi, how care comes before command. Last week, week 3, we looked at the king in his palace. We discovered that power requires guardrails. Today, we arrive at Sha'araim, the final stage, David's life. that aged king looking out over the valley of Elah. I've titled this message, Leading by Influence, and I like this word. I want to talk about the sage era of David's life and see what application we can draw from it. The sage. This is the stage where leadership becomes influence. I want to talk about legacy through others. Sages, if you're a note taker, you might want to write some of these principles down. We draw from the life of King David. We discover from David that sages use their voice. They ain't afraid early and often to talk about God's faithfulness and the way he has shown up in their lives. David is a sage at this point in his life. I want to show you Psalm 37. This is one of the Psalms of David. And I think we get a clue in the text about how old he was when he wrote this particular psalm. Look at verse 25, Psalm 37. I was young, and now I am old. There's some gravity to that sentence, isn't there? Some of you feel that deeply right now. And you can almost picture King David standing on that ridge next to Sha'araim, looking out over the valley of Elah. Once I was young. My bones didn't creak quite as much. There was more pep in my step. I didn't even have a beard yet, much less gray in it. I was young and now I am old, and yet, then he gets wistful and introspective. I love this. Yet I've never seen the righteous forsaken, or their children begging bread. Isn't it interesting, the older you get, the more you notice the little things, like how kids, that moment when Dawn was describing spinning in a circle and the joy she felt in her heart. I didn't know her at 3 years old, but I can picture that. And I love to watch kids in that era of their life and see their honest emotions on display. David's doing this. These parents of children, are always generous and lend freely. Their children will be blessed. This is a sage. This is not the voice of a warrior. It's the voice of a sage. He's reflecting on life. By the way, here's some of the nerdy stuff. Psalm 37 is fascinating, especially in its original language. In the Hebrew, the psalm, it's an acrostic poem. And each stanza begins with the successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Daleth. And the man who once ran toward Goliath, he's writing words. Well, let's back up a few verses. Look at this in verse 3. Trust. It's an acrostic. It begins with a Hebrew letter. I think we're in the third letter of the alphabet at this point. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteousness shine like the dawn, the justice of your cause like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord, and wait patiently for him. Do not fret when men succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. You can picture him, old and gray, writing this. I can. And he goes on talking about strategies for how to cope with, silly little things like when life makes you angry. How to deal with, quote, the wicked, because there are folks that intend you harm. The whole poem reads with perspective. Perspective built over decades of life walking with God. By this point in life, David has stacked up some victories. He killed Goliath, right? All kinds of political victories, all kinds of societal victories. He's also stacked up some failures. We looked at one of those last week. David, Bathsheba. He's experienced repentance. We looked at the 51st Psalm last week. It's this idea that, God, I am not following your ways right now. I'm going this direction. Repentance means a 180-degree turn the other direction. I'm going back to following after you. I'm sorry. I repent. He's stacked up some losses. David, by this point in his life, knows what it feels like to bury a child. He knows what it's like to care for aging parents. He's lost. And he knows God's faithfulness. He's had a lifetime of plumbing the depths of the truth of God's faithfulness. David has learned something only time can teach. What is it? That life is not a sprint. I know it feels that way, especially the older we get. I'll never forget sitting at the Thanksgiving table with my dad. And we all laughed so hard as he explained when he said, man, the older I get, it's like sitting at the top of a metal slide on a piece of wax paper. We weren't laughing at the brevity of life. We were laughing at that image. And I was like, what are you talking about? And he went on to explain that when he was a kid, that was a big deal with metal slides. They'd do that a couple times on waxed paper and get it all slicked up and shined up, and then you could just zoom down that thing. We laughed. And then he got all wistful. He said, the older I get, the faster it seems to go. It feels like life is a sprint. But it's not really. What is it? It's a long walk with God. That's wisdom. Only time can teach. Wisdom is simply knowledge applied from life experience. I lean in. I want to hear more from sages. He's also learned that what matters most is not how loudly you begin. I mean, David killed Goliath. That was loud. A loud way to enter into the court of public opinion. But what matters most is how wisely you finish. That's a sage. And sages use their voice. They're not afraid to tell us about it. David's legacy. Oh, he did some amazing things in the short life he had on earth. But my goodness, we're still informed by his wisdom today. We're reading the Psalms, God's inspired words spoken through him. We used one of them even to inform our worship time when we sang together a few minutes ago. Sages use their voice. How about this principle? Sages, like David, look forward. They don't spend as much time looking in the rearview mirror. No, they've got a windshield. They're looking forward. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Near the end of David's life, he gathers his son Solomon, the heir, the successor to the throne. He says, I've got some wisdom as a sage to drop on you. Listen to what he says. Verse 2 of 1 Kings chapter 2. Actually, this is verse 1. When the time grew near for David to die, he knew it. He felt it. And rather than let this moment pass by, let's have some honest conversation. He gave a charge to Solomon, his son. I'm about to go the way of all the earth. None of us escape death. He said, so be strong. Show yourself a man. There's a lot in that sentence. And observe what the Lord your God requires. This is being a real man, he's telling Solomon. Walk in his ways. Keep his decrees. Keep his commands. Keep his laws and his requirements. As written in the law of Moses, this is not my truth I'm giving you. This is God's truth. It's anchored in truth. He's told us this so that you may prosper in all you do and wherever you go. This is for your own benefit, son. And that the Lord may keep his promise to me. Don't mess this up, son. Your legacy, well, it's my legacy first. If your descendants watch how they live, and if they walk faithfully before me in all their hearts and soul, you will never fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. There will be a king. This promise, it's for generations to come. Notice something about this language. David doesn't begin with political advice. He could have. And Solomon probably needed some political advice. He doesn't begin with military strategy. He could have. He led armies. He didn't. What does it begin with? Faithfulness to God. Because David has realized something that every wise leader eventually learns. The goal of leadership is not success. He's playing the long game. The goal of leadership is succession. This thing we've started, let's see it through. Can I speak for a moment? Could I speak directly to the senior saints in our midst today? Those of us that we might call in the third act of life. Psalm 37, the text we're studying, is written by someone who has lived long enough to see a lot. And I've noticed something about aging. There are usually three voices that it produces. Let's look at them. You can either choose to be the cynic, or the complainer, or the sage. Choose wisely. The cynic says, everything is broken, nothing will get better. I'm stuck in a 24-hour news cycle and I can't take my eyes off of it. The complainer says, let's look in the rearview mirror. The good old days were better. Things used to be different. The world has gone to what? Hell in a handbasket. That's the complainer. But the sage says something better. Psalm 37, verse 3. Back to David's gray-haired, sage-like wisdom he's dropping like a truth bomb. Trust in the Lord and do good. How about verse 7? Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Are you spending as much time with King Jesus as you spend obsessing over the news cycle? The sage doesn't deny hardship. The sage has simply seen God's faithfulness over time, and the sage is willing to tell stories I'll never forget listening to my grandma and grandpa tell me about God's faithfulness during the hardship of the Great Depression. My grandpa was actually a World War I veteran. God was faithful and showed up, and he'd tell stories. I spent time talking with a retired pastor a couple weeks ago, and he told me stories about over and over again in his life where we saw God's faithfulness show up. That encouraged this younger pastor. Here you go. Your perspective, sages, becomes one of the greatest gifts you can give the next generation. Don't waste the opportunity. Not long ago, I joined a senior saint for one of their Bible studies, and we sat around in this group, and it was a bunch of, can I just be honest, old men griping about the news cycle, sharing with wistful tales about the, quote, good old days. I've got a sneaking suspicion that the good old days weren't all that good. There's something about memory that smooths out the rough edges. Afterwards, I had this conversation with one of them. I said, hey, would a better investment of your time be something like this? Would you grab a group of younger leaders and take them out to lunch and tell them stories? You have something to offer them, encourage them, challenge them, be a resource for them, help them. Look forward, not backward. Sages use their voice, they look forward, and they plant for the future. I'm intentionally choosing that word. They should plan for the future as well. I'm not just talking about money here. They're planting for the future. I heard a forester, a certified arborist years ago, describe the difference between two different kinds of trees that people plant. I've got a picture of both of them. I chose them carefully. This one, I hate this tree. Some of you know exactly what this is. It's a Bradford pear. They get stuck in the ground around here. They're actually an invasive species, and they grow quickly. In a few years, they're tall and impressive, sure, but their roots are shallow. Their wood is brittle. And storms come, and they fall over. I almost got taken out by one of those in a windstorm one time, and they stink in the spring. I hate those trees. Then there are oak trees. Yeah. Oak trees grow slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. That tree could be 200 years old. You can plant an oak tree and never get to sit under its shade. But oak trees grow deep roots, and when the storms come, they stand. Leadership is like that. Some people chase fast influence, but the leaders who shape generations grow slowly, quietly, over time. Hear me. David was an oak tree. His courage started in the fields. His character was shaped in caves. His power was tested in the palace. And in the end, his wisdom became shade for the next generation. I love this phrase. A legacy is planting trees whose shade you may never sit under. I love that. Leadership, whether you think yourself a leader or not, you have some area of influence. Leadership is simply influence. It's the way our lives shape the people around us. You're a leader. You have influence. Some of you lead in very visible ways. You manage teams, you run businesses, you teach classrooms, you coach athletes, or you serve in areas of responsibility in your community. Others, you lead quietly, but no less powerful. You're parenting children, you're loving a spouse, you're mentoring young believers, you're serving your neighbors, you're shaping the culture of your workplace just by the way you live. Every one of us, by the way, is responsible for self-leadership, the daily decisions about our character, our faith, the direction of our lives. So whether your influence reaches thousands of people or just a handful, the question is still the same. What kind of influence is my life leaving behind? My legacy? That's a good question to wrestle through. Before we move on, I just want you to do something for me just for a moment. Would you just picture the people who will one day sit in the shade of the trees that you're planting right now? Maybe it's your kids. Maybe it's your grandkids. Maybe it's a young person you're mentoring. Maybe it's someone who's watched how you live your faith even when you didn't think that they were paying attention. Most of us will never see the influence our lives have on the next generation this side of heaven. My grandparents didn't. I mean, when my grandpa died, I was only in 5th grade. I didn't have the wisdom from life experience yet to even know how to articulate a thank you. But his life shaped me in profound ways. I could tell you story after story after story. That's how legacy works. We plant the trees, somebody else sits in the shade. And if that shade points them toward Christ, then our lives will have mattered more than we could have ever imagined. Can we revisit David's life, the narrative arc of his life? I mean, the Judean wilderness, this is where we started, the shepherding season. David learned courage and faith when no one was watching, and we discovered that leadership begins with character. Then from there we moved on to En-Gedi, the cave systems, the warrior David, where he learned restraint, where he learned to choose mercy over revenge. We discovered that leadership deepens when strength and tenderness live in the same heart. Last week we looked at the palace, Jerusalem, the king, power, responsibility, and we discovered this reminder that position does not create character. No, it reveals it. Which leaves us standing on a ridge right outside of Sha'araim, the sage, overlooking the valley of Elah, the place that reminds us where David's story began. The shepherd who once ran toward a giant now stands at the end of his life with something even greater. What? perspective. David began as a shepherd with courage. He became a warrior with care. He ruled as a king with power, but he finished as a sage with perspective. And in the end, David's greatest contribution to Israel was not the battles he won. No, it's the wisdom he left behind. We're still reading the Psalms today, 3,000 years later. So sages use their voice, they look forward, they plant for the future, and most importantly, they point toward Jesus. I'm so excited about this series we launch next Sunday. Some of you are newer around here and you wonder about that light bulb wall out there in the lobby. We're going to talk about that next week. Leading up to Easter, we're going to talk about our influence, the opportunities that God has given us to steward well for Him, to point people toward Jesus. I'm excited about that series. But for today, David actually pointed people toward Jesus. He did. Let me show you. Psalm 37, verse 11 says, this is that psalm we've been studying, the old gray-haired David. The meek will inherit the land. Skip ahead about 1,000 years. Jesus is on the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5, verse 5. He says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." Jesus is echoing David. Actually, he's echoing his own words, divinely inspiring David to write and say 1,000 years before that. Jesus actually specifically quotes David at least 11 times. Some of his messianic claims, he's quoting David. From the cross, he quotes David. David's wisdom was pointing forward to the kingdom of Christ. Because the story of David ultimately points us to another king, King Jesus. Where David faced a giant to save his people, Jesus faced the cross to save the world. Where David ruled a kingdom for a generation, Jesus rules a kingdom that will never end. Let's talk about you. Where are you on the arc, the leadership arc of David's life? Are you in the wilderness today? Some of us are. Some of you are early in your career, maybe you're early in parenting, early in your walk with King Jesus. And you're learning character. You're learning discipline. You're learning faithfulness when even very few people are watching. Hear me, don't rush that season. God does some of His deepest formation right there in the Judean wilderness. Some of us are in the cave system, facing pressures, facing criticism, facing uncertainty. You're leading through difficulty at work. You're navigating challenges in your family. You're trying to stay faithful when circumstances feel unfair. Those seasons teach perseverance and they teach restraint. How about the palace? Some of you are in the palace season of your life and you're carrying heavy responsibility. You're managing influence and decision-making authority. That's where success can quietly test the heart. So the caution here is to guard your character and to keep your guardrails strong. Some of us, we're standing on that ridge outside Sha'arayim, the sage years, where influence may be quieter, but wisdom is deeper. The caution here is to resist cynicism and instead use the perspective that God has given you to encourage and guide and steady the next generation. So wherever you are today, would you walk with God? Would you trust Him? And would you let Him shape your life over time? Would you stand up with me?